Ethiopia, how do people, generally speaking, obviously it's a generalization, but generally speaking, deal with that part of history, the war, Mussolini, the Italians? Do people talk about it? Is it on curricula, or is it something that is just, yeah, it happened and let's just move on from it?
Ethiopians celebrate the victory. They celebrate the people who were killed. There are always memorials and ceremonies once a year or different points of the year to commemorate different battles. So the memory of that is there, but the memories are often of the glories of war,
right?
The victory, the defiance, the heroism. I think that the part of the history that is about what it really means to be at war, how people might have changed during those years because of what they experienced, what they witnessed, that is not very talked about. The trauma of war is not something that's really discussed. The actual brutalities of what happened in the country, I don't think many people know because of the way that the war is celebrated.
And for many, it's still a living memory, right? It's not that long ago.
It's not that long ago.
Yeah. Maybe it will change as time goes on.
Yeah.
People start dying and,
Maybe, but we need those people to talk more.
Yes,
that is
true.
the thing. And I think some are. I think some of this history is coming out more with other researchers, scholars, people who are doing this work. And that's been invaluable.
So your book is obviously not non-fiction, it's fiction, and it's beautifully written, and I already said it, really loved it. And so I was wondering what you think the role of historical fiction by specifically African authors or authors of African heritage plays in the reclaiming of the narrative of African history, or maybe even the rewriting of African history, because it is a history that has largely been written by former colonizers and or outsiders, and it sometimes still happens till today. So when people like you create their own narrative, for example, in The Shadow King or Beneath the Lion's Gaze as well, you do it there as well. What role do you think historical fiction plays in the larger narrative?
I think that the historical fiction coming from writers from the African continent or the diaspora, those stories are starting to push against the dominant narrative, which always centers Europe and Europeans in that. And I know that what I wanted to do in this book was to establish African women, Black women, Africans as center of a global history. We tend to think that African history is just African history, then European history is world history. But actually, no, we've always had this exchange, and Africans are part of and center to global history. And I think other writers who are working in historical fiction, they're doing the same thing. They're pushing that kind of narrative. They're changing what the center is. Yeah.
And in your work in general, not just your writing, you take it a step further. You don't just write historical fiction. You are working on a project right now where you collect information and archival artifacts, right?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm working on something called Project 3541. And you can go to www.project3541.com, and it's going to be an online archive of photographs that I have, and also photographs that people submit from their family dealing with those years 1935 to 1941. So I'm asking everyone, East Africans, Italians, Libyans, the British, Indians were also in this war. Anyone that has family photographs relating to this period, please log on to project3541.com. You can register or subscribe so you get updates, but then you can also upload and submit photographs.
And what do you hope to achieve with that?
I want to make this history wider known. I want the stories that people have to be part of this conversation. about war. So we know that war involved human beings who had families, and here are their descendants. And these people were loved and they were important. And I'd like to honor that history through this website.
Do you think, apart from the fact that I think that's an amazing idea, which is irrelevant, do you think that that project stands or is likely to be standing in isolation, or would you rather see it as being used as a framework for other African countries, African communities to use it as a framework and inspiration to start collecting their own history as well, and then preserve it somewhere or have it somewhere where it's accessible to the wider public, because not everybody has access to archives and libraries, but not everybody, a large amount of people that live on this planet have access to the internet.
Absolutely, and that's what I hope happens. I've been contacted by other, I guess they're organizations, social entities in Africa, in different parts of Africa, saying, we'd like to work with you. We'd like to collaborate. We have access to archives. We want to make them better known to the public, people who don't have access to libraries. And so I find that exciting. And I hope that everyone who's interested in doing this can begin to have conversations so that together I think we can do more. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because access to libraries is something that I always find a little complicated, because it can have a very colonial connotation. Yeah. I was once at a conference where a woman from, I think it was Zimbabwe, I can't remember 100%, gave a paper, and she said that I almost couldn't be here because I almost couldn't do the research, because I almost didn't get a visa, because my country's history is held hostage here. Yeah. So when I first heard about your project, I was thinking, this is amazing, because all you need is the internet, and that's it. You don't need a visa, plane ticket money or whatever. So,
and absolutely. Amazing. I mean, and another thing that's connected to this project, I'm well aware that certain groups of people owned the cameras that photographed other groups of people. That when I am asking for photographs dealing with 1935 to 41, I know that Ethiopians were not owners of cameras. The average Ethiopian was not. Yeah. The Italians brought those cameras. They photographed people. So if sometimes Ethiopians did manage to keep some of the photographs that were taken of their family, or there were studios in Addis Ababa. But if not, there's a component to this. It's just a separate page on the same website that I'm calling Memories Without Faces. And I'm just asking people, do you have the stories of your grandfather, great-grandfather, great-grandmother, whoever? Then tell me something, and let's put that up in place of a photograph so that we have access to that knowledge as well.
So I don't know how much you can give away about it, but so far, have you received a lot of photos? And if so, geographically speaking, where have they come from?
I have been getting a few photos. They've been from Ethiopia, Italy. An Italian man has sent me, he was one of the first people to respond. He said, will you accept anything from an Italian? And I hadn't thought about it. I was really thinking of Ethiopians and Eritreans and Somali. But then I said, of course, this is all of our history. And he mentioned to me that his grandfather had been stationed in Ethiopia during the war. He said, I know that my grandfather has a son from an Ethiopian woman. My family does not want me to research or find out anything about this. But if I give you his name, will you help me find my uncle?
My God.
Which is completely so moving.
Yes. What a responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I said, how do I find that in the whole country of Ethiopia? But I called my mother and said, I don't even know where to begin. And she said, I'll find him. So
I know it's rely on mothers, right?
But he's given me his grandfather's photographs. He's given me the information of his grandfather, where he was stationed, and his name. That is something that will go up on the page as soon as the page becomes fully live. He has asked me to let him know the day it goes up, because he's still worried about his family. He said, my family really refuses to talk about this history. So that is interesting. But I've had very interesting responses from people from all sides of the war on this.
What a shame, if I dare say so, right? Honestly, it's their right to do what they want. But what a big chunk of history that goes missing just out of maybe fear, or I don't know for what reason, obviously. Given the potential impact this book can have and has had ever since it's come out, from my observation, and the fact that it hasn't been published in Ethiopia yet, right?
Right.
We're saying yet,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And what has the reception of Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia been like so far?
They've been incredibly supportive. They've read the book. They've sent me wonderful emails. I have been really grateful for that support, ongoing support and encouragement. It's been wonderful.
Were you maybe a little bit worried about how Ethiopians were going to react, or?
Yeah, I was, because I think part of it was, I'm talking about domestic violence. I'm talking about sexual assault. It's much more than the war. I'm creating visions of men who were heroes to a nation, but not so heroic at home. And that can be difficult for people to talk about. But so far, I haven't received any real pushback on that. If anything, it's been the opposite. Women have been really grateful that this has become part of a conversation in Ethiopia, or within the Ethiopian community.
Well, I'm not Ethiopian, obviously, but I am a woman. And when I read it, I felt so strongly and so happy for not just the women in the book, but the women who the female characters in this book represent. And so I'm glad to hear that generally the reception has been good, because I think it's a momentous book. It shines a different light on something that is very important in a very accessible way, because not everybody reads history books, right? But people can read fiction. So
Thank you.
But talking about the potential publication in Ethiopia, right? When it comes out in Ethiopia, would you rather have it be published in English or in Amharic?
I would love for it to be published in Amharic. Ethiopia has several major languages. So there's Amharic, there's Tigrinya, there's Afan Oromo. Arabic is also spoken there. Any of those languages would be wonderful. Amharic, I think, is the one people would most likely think of first. But in any of those that would be accessible would be fantastic. Yeah. Right.
Because then it makes it more widely accessible. So in terms of English literature being read, well, the English language literature, rather, not English literature, is it quite common in Ethiopia, or is it something that belongs to maybe the upper middle class, or does everybody read English?
I think people within, let's say in Addis Ababa, tend to be, there's a certain group of students, people who go to college can read this. I know that there are people who are sending the books back to their families. So I know it's being read in Addis Ababa by a wide group of people, or maybe in Ethiopia in general. But education is still the result of class. It's still the higher class you are, the better education you have. So I think the readers of the book also fall into similar categories.
So it's much like here as well. I mean, education is quite classist, even in the UK. It's not something exclusive to any one continent. Right. What was the most shocking thing, aspect, fact, whatever you discovered when you did research? Something that, apart obviously from finding out that your great-grandmother is basically Hirut, right? But outside of that, what was the most shocking fact you found?
Oh my goodness. Well, there were certain historical figures that I researched, and they were so bizarre that I said, I can't put them in the book or people will really think I made it up. And one was a British man by the name of Ord Wingate.
Okay.
He was, when the British came into Ethiopia at the very end to help with fight against the Italians, he led the forces. He would show up at meetings with his superiors. He would call a meeting for strategizing. So his superiors would come to a meeting and he's sitting at the desk completely naked.
Oh my God. Why not?
He would sometimes wear nothing but a necklace he made of a raw onion. And he would eat the onion and talk to people.
Good Lord.
I would read in diaries that people would write of encounters with him in Ethiopia, that they have never met a dirtier, filthier man. And yet he was brilliant militarily. But he just did these things. And I thought, how can I put this in there? I can't. People will think I made it up.
Bizarre,
and there are no British in there anyway. I didn't put them in. Very bizarre. And the more I read about it, but I think, speaking of war, the more I began to wonder, did war make him like this? Because he had fought in other things, and he was just really good with guerrilla warfare strategies. And I thought, I wonder if that's what we're seeing. So you can look him up. He's famous.
I will,
and
for
he's
sure.
had streets all around the world named for him because they kept sending him from one rebellion movement to another. And he was the distant cousin of Lawrence of Arabia. So he comes from this family of military people. But yeah, look him up.
I will.
But it's one of those that I read. I said, I can't put this in there. Yeah.
If you have a favorite character in The Shadow King, who would it be and why?
I don't know. I think each of them were interesting and fun to write in their own way. But if I had one where I said, oh, this will be interesting, maybe it was the chorus. That every time the chorus came in, I had fun with them. I not that I didn't with the others, but I liked what they were doing when they would come in. And they would often surprise me with how they saw certain events. So I think, they were maybe my favorite if I had to choose.
Yeah. I think it works really well, even though when they first came, I was like, okay, what is this?
Yeah.
But then when you get used to it, when you are like, oh, okay, this is what it does. I don't want to, spoil it. But what was the rationale behind putting in a chorus?
I was thinking about the Ethiopian storytellers, the troubadours. They're called Asmari, the Asmarioch, that would travel from neighborhood to neighborhood or from bar to bar, singing songs, passing news around, sharing gossip. And I would imagine in 1935, they're also giving updates on battles and talking about the certain heroes. And I wanted the chorus to mimic them. But also I love the Greek tragedies. I think those stories, the plays are fascinating. And there are always these choruses in there that tell their own side of the story. So I wanted to play off of that as well.
Right. I think it works really well. So I thought, it's a good thing you mentioned it because I was meaning to ask you, but I would have forgotten if you hadn't brought it up. So thank you. So what's next for Maaza Mengiste? Any juicy stuff? You hear it here first.
I'm slowly thinking about another book. I am really just opening my mind to see what's available. I thought I would be completely exhausted at the end of this book, the end of this process, but I'm really excited to get back to work again. Okay. So I'm ready. I'm thinking. I'm taking notes. I'm keeping my mind open to see what it is I grab onto.
So no concrete ideas
Not
yet?
yet. Not yet.
Well, we'll keep an eye on your social media.
Thank you. Yes,
Right? You will
yes.
give us hints there.
I will.
Where can people find you, get in touch with you, see what you're doing?
You can find me on Twitter at Maaza Mengiste. You can find me on Instagram the same way. I'm not on Facebook, but those two places are the best.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for the wonderful book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.